Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here today, everyone. Before we get started, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items and let everyone know that the session is being recorded and everyone is muted, but feel free to type in any questions that come up for you in the chat, and we'll open up the line at about the last 10 or 15 minutes for a bit of discussion and question and answers. When you open up your chat screen, just be sure to click on the drop down where it says all panelists and select all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your chat. I'll also remind everyone in the chat a little bit later on there. So let's jump right in. We're really excited to present this opportunity for CNC staff to learn about Canada's Indigenous peoples' history, knowledge, and pedagogies while engaging in reconciliation. Reconciliation is the responsibility of all Canadians, but how much do we all really know about the Truth and Reconciliation Council of Canada's call to act? Truth and Reconciliation Council of Canada calls to action. We are so pleased and honored to welcome our special guests for this three-part webinar series. Elder Brenda Mason and Laurie Houston, registered early childhood educator, will be spending time with us today and each Thursday for the next couple of weeks to share Indigenous knowledge and stories from their perspectives, teachings, and lived experiences. So welcome, Elder Brenda. Welcome, Laurie. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We are honored to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. So my name is Brenda Mason, and my Anishinaabe name, Mama's Navujra Baikwe, that translates to imprint hanging standing woman. My clan, Dudem, is I belong to a fish clan, Red Sucker, and I was raised in Sander Lake, and I'm a grandmother. This is our traditional way of introducing ourselves, telling you who I am. But I'm really, I feel really blessed and honored to do this work and to share our lived experiences as Anishinaabe people, Indigenous people. First, I just want to acknowledge our Creator. We have a new day that we've been given, blessed with. Our Creator continues to guide us, continues to set our path as we walk up on Mother Earth, and continues to bless us with love and compassion. I'd also like to acknowledge Mother Earth and the land that we are sitting on, that we are a part of Fort William First Nation territory. Many Ojibwa people have been part of this land, Thunder Bay area. And so there are many of us that have moved to Thunder Bay. There's Ojibwe people, Cree people, and Ojibwe. Mm-hmm. And many of us speak our language. I speak my language. And there are different languages and different dialects that we speak. Many of us do. So in order to acknowledge our land, you can see the picture behind us. That's the sleeping giant. And the sleeping giant we're viewing from a different angle. This angle that we're viewing, we're looking to the west. So that's a different angle. And there's also another angle that we see it from Thunder Bay, which is on the west side, looking to the east. So there are stories about the sleeping giant, but we don't have time to share that story. But this is part of the Thunder Bay, our sleeping giant, and we wanted to acknowledge the universe as well. The universe is part of the earth. So you guys with that.
Thank you, Brenda, and welcome. And I too, my name is Laurie Houston, and I am a part of the Métis Nation within Canada. Recently finding out as a my family has been entangled in the colonial history of Canada. But all of my work has been with Indigenous children and families in mostly Northern Ontario, but I have worked across Canada. And my home community is Red Lake, Ontario. And I am also a mother and an auntie, and I'm here with you all as an educator today to share my experiences in working with Indigenous children and families. Our topic in Walking Together in Reconciliation is going to start with a bit of a background on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. Was established in 2008 by the federal government. And it was mandated to promote a national reconciliation and foster healing between the First Nation, the Inuit, and the Métis people, and the non-Indigenous people in Canada. The primary focus of the Commission, the Truth and Reconciliation, was to travel across the country, across Canada, to hear the stories of Indigenous people's experiences at residential school and other federal policies that influence Indigenous people today. Many of the Indigenous people courageously shared their stories. And this was done over a 6-year period of collecting stories, all the findings came together under the support of Justice Murray Sinclair's guidance. And a report was written in 2015, The Truth and Reconciliation for the Future, along with 94 calls to action for Canadians and for the provincial, federal governments to take action with direction, which was all Indigenous stories and Indigenous led through the Justice Murray Sinclair. Each of us plays a part in our national reconciliation process with Indigenous people in Canada. And the calls to action that relate specifically to education is where we fit in as early childhood educators, as educators working with children and families in Canada. And we're all striving to provide those inclusive environments that are welcoming to all nationalities, all people in our programming, where families are feeling valued and appreciated, respected, and especially safe. And so that's how we're going to share a bit about call number 10 and number 12 under the education calls that relate directly to early childhood education. And the report itself can be viewed on the website. I know we can share a link here as well to the Truth and Reconciliation report. So it's just going to be a very small glimpse into the report today, and it will be shared from our perspectives and how we have interacted, how we are walking in reconciliation today, in my experience as an early childhood educator and Brenda's experience as an elder, and what it means to us to work and do this work in reconciliation with Indigenous people. So with that, I'm going to ask Brenda to share a little bit about her experience on the Truth and Reconciliation calls in the report.
Again, bonjour. I'm 65 years old, and I'm still young. I just want to say miigwech for being here today. And miigwech for doing the work that you are doing. You're going to have influences in how our children are going to gain knowledge and awareness about the classes that you're going to be teaching. I'm sure it's going to be different, unique to each class. So you as a person, as a teacher, will influence the children, and to be able to know who you are, where you come from, and to share that in a good way. But at the same time, sharing about who we are as Indigenous people, and having that knowledge in a good way as well. For me, I'm social services worker, and I provide cultural and spiritual services. That's my main work that I've been doing for 30 years. So it's under mental health that I been doing my work, and but also education. I was a teacher in a couple of the classes in the past with Oshki Winjack Education Institute at the college level. And it's in those places that I was able to bring in the truth and reconciliation, especially the calls to action. And in the calls to action, there are different categories. And the one that we are looking at is child welfare and education. The one that I've been looking at my workplace is under health. And there are different different objectives in each that we look at. So I brought it into my work under health, introduced that section to my colleagues, and it talks about how the government is responsible to make the changes what happened. And so one of the things that that was important to me was to look at bringing in services that is geared towards Indigenous people that are coming to our organization for help. So that's looking at our traditional healing ways, doing smudging, other ceremonies, providing Indigenous therapy, utilizing our traditional teachings, and having a space and creating an environment to do that. So today at my workplace, we have a cultural spiritual room, and we're able to do ceremonies in that room. The room is ventilated, and I can have about 12 people in that room so that we can do healing circles, sharing circles, in other ceremonies. So I do my one-on-one therapy, but I do my traditional healing work in that room. So it's been a long journey, a good one too, though. We have that today, and a lot of it has to do with the truth and reconciliation that kind of speed it up for us to have access to healing, a traditional way of working with our people. And the other thing that we did was to provide education, awareness, and knowledge to the staff of the organization where I work. So we have done some workshops, and I've done a lot of work over the years, in maybe the last 15 years. I was the only Indigenous employee there at that time, but in the last 3 years, they've been hiring other Indigenous staff. So we use the call to action to make sure that changes are happening, and that is happening in a good way. So now we look to the education as well. When I see many of our people going to the college, universities, and any other educational organization, wanting to get educated. And for many years, we know that many of the education had one perspective, one way of teaching, but that's changing. And again, it's through that truth and reconciliation. things are changing. And so now today we are looking to where can we make the most impactful, in a good way, change. And that to us, that's with our children. To start with daycares, kindergarten, like a elementary school level, we need to bring those stories to our children and to create an environment that speaks to who we are as Indigenous people in this area. And throughout Canada, we're all unique, we're different in how we practice our traditional way. Our teachings are unique to the West Coast and to the East Coast. So we as educators, we're responsible to educate ourselves, to know and to be aware of what those traditional ways are, or how we educate our children. The way I was raised when I was growing up. I was raised in Sand Lake First Nation Reserve, and we have stories. Us Indigenous people, we have stories to share today that speaks to who we are and how we were raised as children. I didn't go to residential school, but I went to a day school, and the day school still had an impact on us as Anishinaabe people. And but because in terms of a time frame, we could only scratch, share a little bit with you the way how we were raised. I was sharing with Laurie a bit earlier, when I was growing up, before I went to school, I was raised in a traditional way. And I can tell some stories about that. And then when I went to school, when I came of age to go to school, things changed. This is where at school, this is where I learned. I heard that the stories of the things that was being said in class and through the books as well. After a while, it was not good to be an Indian or to be an Anishinaabe. It's better to speak English, and so many of us did that. We spoke English more than our own language in our own reserve, but that's just one change. There are other things change, and also the church also came into the picture, and that also changed our way of life. But some of the things remained. More or less, it was practiced behind closed doors. It was at home, and those things that I can share, and I've shared. So my sharing, it comes from the lived experiences, I've shared many of those stories as well in class as a teacher, and with my students, and they're all Indigenous students, so we got to share a lot. We shared back and forth, and what they experienced, of the residents of school, the impact, the intergenerational trauma, the healing that is taking place today. We need to speak to that as well. And we need to speak that and tell stories with our children, how the grandmother has done healing from all the experiences that we've had. With the government, the policy they put in place had to do with assimilating us into dominant society, but that did not work. But to share those stories with the children, your grandmother, came from this, and is here today and living a good life, and teaching them to go hunting, to mention about setting up snares. So our culture way of living, we're starting to share that. We're bringing some of those teachings into the classroom. bringing the grandmothers, the grandfathers into the classroom, share teachings about the drumming, the hand drum, where did the drum come from? What material do we use to make the drum? We talk about the wood, talk about the skin from the animal. So there's many teachings that we have to share today. And that's really important to share that with the children. And I'm going to stop here for now. And like I said, we do have a lot to share, and we have two other sessions to share. So Miigwech for listening. I really appreciate.
And I'm going to share a little bit from my perspective and my responsibility in early childhood education and how reconciliation has unfolded. So Brenda's right. Many of the experiences for Indigenous people were very conflicting. It wasn't how they seen themselves, but when they stepped out to mainstream, it was another story and another narrative on how Indigenous people were that didn't fit the narrative that was happening in their communities, in their households. So they felt like they had to, maybe speak English, do these types of things to fit in, to feel a sense of belonging. There was a lot of racism attached to being Indigenous in Canada. And doing the work in reconciliation, we must know that we have to confront this racism in going forward. And this is part of reconciliation as well. And I also want to acknowledge that everybody on the call is participating today in reconciliation with us. In taking the time to hear our side of the story and our experiences is reconciliation with the Indigenous people. So for me, I subscribe to educating myself and others on the legacy of residential schools, the injustice to Indigenous children and families, the intergenerational trauma that has been going on in Canada for many years. And the one thing that I know as an educator, the most important thing is that we connect to every student, because we know that their interests and their individualness, their context on where they're coming from is where we're going to meet them, is where we're going to be able to support them in their education journey. So it's very important that we understand Indigenous children that are attending our programs and the families and all of the other children and where they're coming from and who they are, connected to their identity and their experiences. And I think definitely the group on the call today has some really rich cultural experiences and stories themselves. And you need to think about your own experiences and your own stories when thinking about the Canadian context of Indigenous stories and elders, and because that's where we all start. We start with ourselves, and then we can expand that way in understanding. So definitely the role as early childhood educators is start to take some time to understand what the residential school legacy in Canada looks like. And this is what the birth of the Truth and Reconciliation. These are the 94 calls to help better improve the society, Canada, relationships with Indigenous people. Some of the things that we can do when we look at call number 12 in the report, it says we call on the federal government, provincial to territory, and Aboriginal governments to develop culturally appropriate early childhood education programs for Aboriginal families. So this is a call that they're saying we want everybody to kind of step up in early childhood education and provide those culturally appropriate programs. But as engaged citizens of Canada, as educators, we really have to understand what culturally appropriate means to us in working in reconciliation, and what does it mean in the Indigenous context to provide culturally responsive programming. So I'm going to share a bit about what that looks like for me and how I've been able to provide cultural responsive programming in early childhood. My background, Alder Brenda and I have been working together for probably 12 years, just over 10 years. And I spent 10 years working in a post-secondary Indigenous school, Oshki Windjak, delivering, I was the coordinator for the Indigenous Early Childhood Education Program. So it was 100% Indigenous educators obtaining their early childhood diplomas. But they were working within the mainstream curriculum of an early childhood education diploma program with some Indigenous perspectives, but they were bringing in the perspectives. I was helping foster that awakening of their culture, bringing that into the EC context. So this has been my work, just really trying to bridge the cultures in ECE and making sure that the Indigenous perspective shows up and it's not just a Western way of teaching children in our programming. And so that would look like celebrating family, ensuring that families are part of early childhood education, extended family, grandparents, cousins. This is a big part of Indigenous children's identity, their learning, their education, is connection to family. So often also the other piece would be to ensure that there was space for language, that their language would be supported and fostered, and experiences, the stories that they can relate to as educators and as Indigenous children in Canada. So the being able to share knowledge on the realities of place, on where they live, what's happening, what are the connections, who lives within their communities, what First Nations are close by, inviting the parents to share their experiences, inviting the parents to be, so it's very collaborative environments. It's there isn't necessarily a lead teacher. It's very much collaborative with the children as well. The children are really valued in the Indigenous culture, and they are also seen as a gift within our programs to share knowledge and to bring knowledge. So we definitely allow a lot of space for the child's autonomy to bring in their perspectives. We use the environment, place, a lot of connections to place and environment to help support the culturally appropriate programming. So we talk about who's in our neighborhood. We talk about the history of the lakes, the rivers, the land in which we all walk and participate within our own communities, and who was here first, and all of those types of things. Reconnecting back is totally embedded in the Indigenous perspectives. And some of the other things to culturally appropriate means letting Indigenous people tell their stories. It means doing some of our work as facilitators, co-facilitating Indigenous people to come into our programs, working with Indigenous educators, organizations to visit our programming, our early childhood education centers, to share their perspectives. As non-Indigenous educators are not expected to teach the Indigenous knowledges, but they can foster and facilitate those teachings. And if you have Indigenous children and families in your program, they're going to help you develop those culturally appropriate practices within your program. We ask for input, and we collaborate together on what's important for them to be visible, or the happenings within the programs. And we're inclusive to family. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. We are going to have some questions so we can get into a little bit more in depth. But I'm thinking, Brenda, did you want to add anything around the culturally appropriate? I know you added a few things, but
I think one of the things that as an educator, for us to remember is, where are the Anishinaabe people, the Indigenous people, where we come from. Many of us, there is 3 groups of Indigenous people. What I mean by that, who practices our traditional way. For example, the
Inuit.
There's a group like in this area, in Thunder Bay area up north, especially up north. There are Indigenous people that practice ceremonies, the smudging, attend sweat lodge, gather medicines. There are, we call ourselves traditional people, or practice our traditional traditional way, with traditional practices. And there are people that are Christians. They don't smudge. They don't go to ceremonies. They go to church. And there's another group that practice both. There are people that go to church, and there are people that practice our traditional way, meaning they smudge. They go to a sweat lodge. And this is something that's important for you as an educator to be aware when you have Indigenous students in your workplace. It's important to be aware of that, because Christian people do not practice the smudging or the ceremonies. And it's important to know that, so that you can adjust what kind of activities that you bring into your class. And people that, there are people that like to learn how to set a snare for rabbit if you're up north. You can do that here in Thunder Bay as well. But it depends what the environment you're teaching. If you're in the city, you can adjust the activities that you bring into the children. Because today, as Indigenous people, we're everywhere. We're just not up north anymore. We are across Canada. There are urban Indigenous people. And the other thing too that, and I'll demonstrate with this, is the way managade nungum gagi zak we gaisek the badge me we the majuna nunja don't you can machine when I go and snabik the way nimendan ga bisndo shank we got doesn't the man the majuna. So that's a Uji Cree language. So I just demonstrated speaking my language. I've been in Thunder Bay for about 40 years. So I have to admit that I've been losing some of my words in my language. I'm not as fluent as I used to be. When I first moved to Thunder Bay, I was actually more fluent than I am today. However, I'm changing that. I have many family members living in Thunder Bay, so when I connect with them, I speak my language. And so I'm practicing. I don't want to lose more of my language. And also talk with I do youth circles. Of course, I'm not doing that right now because of the COVID. And the youth are 12 and up, and I'll talk to them in our language. So, so that even for you, just learning some of the language, like, say bonjour. Bonjour is greeting. Miigwech is thank you. And so just those little words that will help you to develop a good relationship with the children. And sometimes when you say bonjour, they may not get what you said, because especially the urban children, they didn't learn their language. And many of them are just starting to. The youth that I come across, they tell me that my mom didn't teach me how to talk in our language, and now I want to learn. So in Thunder Bay, before the COVID, there was some classes popping up for you to learn Ojibwe and Ojibwe. But of course, the COVID, they put everything on hold. But it will start again. And they're starting to try to find ways to continue through online learning. So they're finding different ways, and it's also good to share about who you are. Share if you speak a different language, to share that language with them, and they can speak their language too with you. Them, talking to each other, sharing with each other, sharing your culture. We like to hear from other people. Your way of life, your values, your protocols of how you practice your way of life, and we'll share that with you as well. The children, you ask the children questions. It's not just children asking questions; it's allowing them to have room for them to ask you as well.
I think Brenda shared a really important point. So Indigenous people in Canada are extremely diverse. There's many, many languages, like, I don't know, hundreds of Indigenous language in Canada through every area. Different where they, it's all connected to place and geography on where they live within Canada. They'll have different dialects. They will have different ceremonies. They will have different ways of being and doing. There is commonalities, of course, amongst the Indigenous people in Canada, is they're connected to their land, and they are extremely knowledgeable in the environment. Environmental scientists, they know the environment and where they live, because this is very much connected to who they are. But huge diversity. So the biggest thing about working with Indigenous people and supporting Indigenous people is to understand some of the Indigenous people connected to the area in which you live and work. And who are there? Is there a First Nation close by? Trying to do some of your own investigating. If you don't have Indigenous people attending your programs because you are supporting newcomer families to Canada, it's a good opportunity to tell and share some of the newcomer families that, you know, in this area that we live, and maybe your program is located just a kilometer from a First Nation community. Maybe you do have First Nation people attending your programming. So again, their experience is going to be very different. And because of a colonial history of Indigenous people in Canada, there's huge gaps in their knowledge and culture and ways of being, including myself. I didn't even know that I have always walked with Indigenous people, but I didn't know that I myself had the Indigenous connections, because it was severed and hid in my family, because it wasn't a good thing to be Indigenous in the early 1900s in Canada. So you hid who you were. So this is just surfacing for myself and my family, and realizing our Indigenous connections, and that our ancestors come all the way back to the 1500s in Canada. And Canada has been here long before 150 years. Indigenous people have been here. There's stories of 3,000 years that Indigenous people have been walking here in Canada. So kind of do some investigating on where you live and who are the Indigenous people, what is their language that they speak, where was the residential school located in your community. Today they might look like a modern day Catholic school, but it was that same property that there was a residential school operating. So that's all part of your role as, you know, understanding Indigenous people, walking in reconciliation. So good for that.
I think it's, we both mentioned that across Canada, we practice a different way of living. Each one way to make sure that you have the knowledge is asking the questions, asking where you are. For example, if you go up north to one of the reserves, it's best to find out about that reserve before you go there, to get to know. And if you have an opportunity to meet someone from that particular reserve you're going to meet someone, start asking, is there someone from up there? And then sitting down and asking them. And then when you get there, be prepared to ask questions. And many of the people are gladly to tell you, share some stories with you. And you need to also remember, many of us, especially around my age, we like to tell stories about our life. But many of us are also now educated. They tell stories, but in a different way. So there are, when you look at generations to next generations, it's changing. We are changing. But we're also, many of us are also going back to who we are as Anishinaabe people, and reconnecting to the land, reconnecting to who we are, and reconnecting to the animals as well. And there's a lot of teachings that we can use as an educator. If you study about the wolves, how does the wolves live? What's their habitat? How do they? What's their rules as a living as a pack? You know, it's family.
Mhm.
You're using the animals to provide the family dynamic of of an animal with the children, and most often they do get it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Brenda. And we get to share a lot more in depth about the Indigenous pedagogies and how the teachings and those perspectives through, teachings connected to the land and connected to all of the things living, including plants and animals. But I want to just quickly bring your attention back to an earlier call, number 10, which talks about creating legislation in the government level that is performed and is of consent of Indigenous people. Because there's so many injustice in Canada, which include lack of funding. Some of the schools that on reserve are very much underfunded. There's a gap in education for Indigenous children in Canada. You hear about on news, there's a huge issue with water, fresh water in these communities within Canada. Many of the communities don't have access to fresh water. They don't have water. They have to use bottled water, have their water brought in. So there's still today, the history and those inequities are very present in the communities and affecting Indigenous people. So call number 10 talks about how education has to reflect and change at a legislation level to have more funding availability, more opportunity to enable families and parents to fully participate in their child's education. It shouldn't be separate. There's rights in number 10 to protect their languages. There's a section in number 10 that curriculum and documents and different teachings have to be developed for culturally appropriate programs. There's respecting and honor the treaty relationships in Canada, which is another government policy, and it's about where Indigenous people have been located in connection to land. So when we think about improving education and success for Indigenous people, that's where a lot of the Truth and Reconciliation have identified what exactly needs to be done. But we do, as educators, have to acknowledge that there's still a lot of inequities for Indigenous children and families in Canada, including basic needs, like fresh water, living conditions, and a lack of participating in education and being able to be involved in the same mainstream education children are getting off reserve. So I think we're almost at the end of our time. It's gone very quickly. We're approaching 40 minutes. I'm going to conclude with a statement, and then I'm going to ask Brenda if she wants to conclude with any quick thoughts. And we're going to be able to have a couple questions. The concluding thing is, it's time that Canada and educators, commit to working together to honor promises and fully implement the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And the fact that your organization has come to us and asked us to share our teaching is really awesome. Like, the newcomers are taking a lead in, wanting to understand some of the Indigenous people in Canada. Even though your programs aren't fully Indigenous programs, but you're committed to, the organization is committed to helping you understand that there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of mistruths about Indigenous people in Canada, and that everybody has to take some time to understand who the Indigenous people are in Canada and allow for their perspective to come forward. So that's part of our working together and coming together, and the knowledge is available. We just need to ask, talk, and have those questions, and how we can come together to join our own hearts and our own knowledge to create. So, Miigwech, thank you.
I think one of the best ways that I've shared with my students, the best way for us to share each other's knowledge is for us to sit down in a circle and have a talk, and just going back and forth, having a discussion about who we are, because many of us didn't know ourselves either. We're just, and we are reconnecting to who we are. And so that's what we have been doing, sitting down with each other, having a cup of coffee, and having a talk and sharing about our lives as Indigenous people with Indigenous people. But it's the best education to occur in an Indigenous education is to be taught by our own people, to be taught by our own people. So that's miigwech for being here, miigwech for listening, miigwech for your comments. I was looking at the chat, I saw a lot of comments and questions even, and the thank yous. So to miigwech, thank you.
Thank you so much. Having you both here, really, like you're saying, sharing stories amongst, like in a sharing circle. For us, having you here to share has been a real honor. It's been really, really wonderful. And oh my gosh, I have so many notes, and you're right, the chat, there was lots of questions in the chat, lots of people thanking you so much for being here and sharing your stories. It really was wonderful to hear. I heard a lot of parallels, and there was some chatter in the chat box here on parallels between our programs and a lot that you were talking about. Fascinating things like you talked about the diversity of Indigenous families, and you can't assume that everyone, it's not a cookie cutter. Everyone is different, and everyone has their own path and their own language and their own culture and ways of doing things, and culturally responsive programming. This is really something our CNC programs do beautifully for our newcomer children, but it was really wonderful to hear about that within the context of Indigenous families and children. And Elena said at MTC, we work with newcomer children, and we have a culturally responsive program to give every child an equal opportunity to learn and develop in their new country. We had some questions for Elder Brenda about stories. Naomi asked early on, what is your role within your community as an elder? I think she was questioning, what does that mean? Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Oh, that comes with stories. What I will say is I didn't choose to be an elder. You're chosen by your community. They come to you. In the beginning, they start coming to you and offering you tobacco, and they start calling you, this is my elder. That's how they start introducing you, and you start to realize you're being referred to as an elder. And but it was a journey in itself for me to come to be where I am today. And my role as an elder is to provide for me to sit down with someone with a cup of coffee, and I listen to their stories. They ask questions about ceremonies or about smudging, about medicines, and I share with them what I know, my own experiences. And I don't know everything. I don't know a whole lot, but I know from my experiences. That's what I share. And so people come to me for different reasons. A lot of it has to do with their life experiences, and I listen a lot. So that one of the sites that I provide at the Ashki, it's called Bear Women Listening. And actually, the Bear Women, the title Bear Women, it's honoring my auntie. Her name was Bear Women many years ago. She had passed a long time ago. So just remembering her, honoring her, that's why I called it Bear Women. And she, I'm sure she's listening. And she was talking when we're all sharing. She's still with me in spirit. So I have a lot of stories, and my approach is a holistic when I listen to people. I hear the mind, body, emotions, and spirit. But I'm also spiritually strong. And I stand on my own 2 feet. I am my own person.
Beautiful.
With my community.
Yeah, wonderful.
I hope that kind of answers a bit.
Yeah, wonderful, thank you. And Laurie, I have a question here for you. I had a couple. Because Indigenous peoples are connected to the environment, can you talk about the children and the environment in childcare a little bit?
The environment inside would also be very different than our traditional programming in a mainstream environment. The items, the things that the children have access to in their play spaces would be a lot of the outdoor environment coming in as well. Some of the things that they have collected, the experiences are going to be different because of where they live and connected to place. So that is really honored. So in the dramatic play centers and different things, they're not necessarily going to have occupational police or firemen or ambulance driver type uniforms to play with, because that isn't in existence in a lot of the communities.
Mhm.
So that's not something that's familiar to them unless they read the book.
Yes.
So they would have the fire keeper, they would have the pot where they're making their tea. They would have their babies in traditional baby carriers, which they call a tikanagan. So when you walk into an Indigenous early childcare center in even some of the urban settings are bringing a lot of those things back into their
Mhm.
cultural place. Even they may have like outdoor camp set up in dramatic play, so it's more of the fishing and the trapping and the stuff like that in their dramatic play area. So
Mhm.
it's going to be relevant to their life and to what they are experiencing within their families.
Yeah, culturally responsive, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I also have a question about how do you explain, and Ivanka asked, how do you explain the history to the youngest generations who live here in a different time?
Yeah, Brenda says storytelling. So yeah, we start with the story. Yeah, definitely. And we talk about it from our perspective. So if you're new to Canada and you say, I learned a little bit about Indigenous people today. I was on a call and they told me a little bit about the communities and they talked about this report that was created in 2015, where they identified some of the things to help with the injustice to Indigenous people. So you always ground yourself in your own experience and your own perspective, and then you build from that.
Yeah, that is
Just build.
great advice. I really loved, actually, I thought it was really powerful when you mentioned, Lori, that everyone taking the time to learn and be with us here today, that's in fact part of reconciliation. Because I think for a lot of us, we look at it and we think, what can we do? What can we, what can we do? What does it mean for us? And how can we make it better? And I think that that's really powerful to recognize that everyone that sat in on the call today, everyone that's thanking you and saying, oh my gosh, what a powerful experience, that is part of reconciliation. It's the learning and it's the growing together and hearing the stories and gaining a little bit of a better understanding of the history and stories. I think that's and I like that idea of grounding yourself in how did you say that?
Just in your own perspective, and
Perspective.
just the way we are modeling to you our experiences is how we're going to be able to teach you and share our story. I do want to say one thing. I want to say that one of the biggest, a real gift that was given to the participants today was to hear Brenda in her language.
Yes.
So not everybody gets to hear the Indigenous language in Canada. So I thank you, Brenda, for sharing your language today with us.
Yeah, beautiful.
I think the other thing mentioning about looking at each culture, each race is from our perspective, but we also need to remember we're all human race.
Mm-hmm.
That's what brings us together. It doesn't matter what color you are, what culture you come from. We're all human race, and so that's where we are. We have the common place to bring ourselves together and to share our life story with each other. We're all human.
Yeah. Susanna actually wrote something in the chat that I think is beautiful and worth sharing. She said, excellent information to remind us to include other cultures in our programs, so even our CNC programs, and recognizing the fact that the Indigenous peoples are the root of why other cultures are here. They're the root, they're the first. I think that's beautiful. Yeah, thank you, Susanna.
You got for that?
Yeah.
Am I missing anything? I know Trisha's keeping track of the chat here with me too, because there's lots of chatter going on, so I don't want to miss anything. If you have a really pressing question and I haven't gotten to it yet, maybe type it in again for me. Someone asked about, is there a story behind the feather that Elder Brenda you were holding? Someone noticed the feather that you were holding. Is there a story behind that?
Yes, we have as Indigenous people when. We're just it's just a white eagle feather. Oops, I disappear. The white feather is the white tail, and this one is the wing. So each feather has their responsibility to how they carry the eagle, how they fly. But we can be here all day.
Yeah.
But we have a very strong sacred significance to feathers. For us, the eagle feather is the eagle is the most sacred bird And our elders teach us it's the ego that takes our prayer to the Creator, to the sky. When we smudge and when we the smoke, when the smoke goes up, and the ego comes to take that smoke, it's the prayer that goes there and takes that ego. The ego takes that the prayer to the Creator, to the sky, because it's the ego that can fly the highest.
Yeah.
And it's not to say the other birds are just as sacred as the ego is, but that ego, that's why we use the ego feather in our prayers, in our sharing circles, in all the ceremonies. You'll always see an eagle feather being utilized. That is a short version of it.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yes. Yeah. Because we're getting down to our last few minutes. I have Khadija asking, please teach us one word in your language. Is there one word that you?
Bonjour. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Yeah. That's greetings.
Greetings. Hello.
Hello.
Bonjour and miigwech. Yeah.
BOOHZOO. Bonjour.
And do you say it with a z sound or j? Is it bonjour?
Bonjour. Bonjour.
Okay.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Wonderful. Thank you. Beautiful. I
When
also
you have an accent, you'll be saying you come out a little bit different.
yes, I bet.
Hear the accents.
We have many people asking about where can I get more resources as an early childhood educator? Where can I get resources about the culture and the ways of life, things that will help me?
Honestly, like it's not easy. It's not easy for Indigenous people to get these beautiful teachings materials all written up. It takes a bit of Googling and stuff. You can find things, but ethic, really true resources are still coming to be and surfacing all the time. New Indigenous resources are being developed, more so now than when I was first coming out as an early childhood educator. I went to like New Zealand or Australia to find most of the Indigenous resources. But I think start with Googling, but one place is there's Indigenous friendship centers that are connected across Ontario, and I think there would be Indigenous childcare networks in each province, and they're going to have a whole early learning section within their program. And also I will share with Heather, there is a federal Indigenous framework for early learning for Canada. And that there is going to tell you a little bit about each of the groups, the Inuit, the Métis, and the First Nation people. And it's a perfect resource to start with. So it's a federal framework for working with Indigenous people in Canada.
The libraries are also starting to gather books, information about Indigenous across Canada. The libraries will have
more children's books are surfacing.
Well, I saw someone said, we need more Brenda. We need more Elder Brenda. And that is exactly our plan, actually. As we wrap up, I want to remind everyone that there are 3 of these webinars. So this is the first of 3. And to get the full benefit, really, we do recommend that you attend all of them. And the next 2 will build on what Elder Brenda and Lori shared today. So I really recommend that you join us for those as well. Sign up for them if you haven't already. And I will look for the evaluation link and I'll plug it into the chat in a moment. Once you finish your feedback form, then you'll have a link to, or you'll be able to request your certificate for attending this session. But just as we wrap up, it's just changed to 2 o'clock, so we're right on time. I just want to say a very, very big genuine thank you so much for being here with us, Elder Brenda and Lori. Thank you to everyone who stayed on for the whole call with us here today. It really was a pleasure. It's an honor, and we all learned so much. Every time we get together like this, it really, even if you take a little bit more and get a little bit more understanding, and it's all moving in the right direction. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to our next session next week. So I'm gonna look for the form here.
We too feel very grateful to be with you. Yes, it's very reciprocal in that, and gratitude. So
yeah,
thank you.
Miigwech.
Good.
So miigwech, thank you.
Thank you. So I've just plugged in the feedback form link there. Emil will also get that sent out to everyone who's attended here today. So just fill that out and you can get your participation form, everyone. And I guess we'll sign off for today. Thank you so much. And I look forward to next week. Take care. Enjoy your day, everyone.